Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. Now, you and I probably didn't like the election results that came out yesterday in Canada's federal election, but there is no such thing as dooming or becoming depressive. There is only doing better. And I think that I want to, from this point on, basically just start orienting the channel towards how do you do better and how do you win next time. Because there was actually a lot of good that happened in this election, obviously a lot of bad and some very ugly results out there. And today in this video, I'm going to start off with a bit of a nutshell of the entire election. What was some of the good, what was some of the bad, and what was the ugly? We will start off with the latter. The ugly results of this election were obviously people like Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre losing his seat in Carleton. There was also people like Michelle Ferreri in Peterborough and other veteran Conservatives who are great MPs, and I think it was just the ridings that they were running in that were just not going to let them be reelected no matter what they did on the ground. I can say I was wrong about Pierre Poilievre losing Carleton, as were many Conservatives out there. I'd even been talking to people on the ground in Carleton who were concerned about Poilievre losing, but even their reports were that the suburbs were 50-50. And I'm thinking, well, if the suburbs are 50-50 and all the acreages are probably still very conservative, I assume that Poilievre has a good chance of pulling it out. He's pulled out close elections within 10 points since 2004, so why would it change now? And what ended up happening in Carleton, if you actually go and look at the specific results in that riding, is that the NDP 100% collapsed. I was thinking that it's kind of absurd for the Liberal to suck up more than half the NDP vote, so it might be difficult for Fanjoy to overcome Pierre Poilievre's lead of 10% that he's had in previous elections. But quite literally, the NDP collapsed from around 9.8% or 10% all the way down to like 1.3%. Pretty much anyone who voted NDP last time voted Liberal this time, and then Fanjoy, probably by grabbing up some middle class anti-Trump voters, was able to overcome Pierre Poilievre and beat him by a few points. That's obviously very tragic, and that is going to have major effects in conservative world for the next few months, seeing what's going to happen with the leader of the Conservative Party not actually having a seat, whether or not or a Conservative MP is going to give up their seat so he can continue in Parliament, if there's going to be a leadership race. At this point, I just really don't know, so we will be revisiting that in the future. I'll probably start putting together more edited content that kind of goes over the stuff more in detail, considering that we are kind of outside of the horse race politics of the election. So those were the ugly results. People like Poilievre losing, Michelle Ferreri, a great MP, Carrie Lynn Finley down in Surrey White Rock losing, South Surrey White Rock. A lot of great candidates, a lot of great incumbents ended up losing. Rick Perkins out in I forget the name of the riding. I was talking about it a lot yesterday on stream, but forgive me, but he lost his seat out in Nova Scotia. But then, oddly enough, Conservatives ended up picking up a lot of seats. So we're now transitioning to the good here. Conservatives ended up picking up a lot of seats in places that they hadn't won in a very long time and winning pretty decisive victories. So this is the riding of Vaughan Woodbridge. The Conservative Michael Gugli, I cannot pronounce people's last names. I'm sorry. I'm just going to call him Michael. Michael, the candidate for the Conservative Party, won that riding with 59.9% of the vote, and that is with all the polls counted. There was no more votes left to count in that riding, and the Liberal was ousted, who only got 38.1% of the vote, and that was, in fact, the incumbent, not some new guy who took over the riding, who maybe people didn't connect with very well or didn't like. This guy had been the candidate, I believe, for a few terms. This is what the ridings results were back in 2021. Francisco Sobera won with 45.98% of the vote, and the Conservative lost with 40.35% of the vote. So this is a major upset for the Conservatives. Look, the Conservative last time gets 40.35, and this time they win with 59.9% of the vote, effectively 60%. That, between the Liberal and the Conservative, is a 30-point swing in the vote. Because what has happened in this election is it's actually gotten far less east versus west. It has become working class neighborhoods. It has become sort of like a lot of minority voters versus voters who are living in metropolitan suburban areas. There are a lot of people who ended up voting Liberal because of what this chart says. They were just voting against Trump. Now, they still won. If you get the votes, you win, obviously. Well, look at this chart that says the most important factors when deciding your vote. So, for reducing your cost of living, that was a very important vote for people between the ages of 18 and 29, 30 and 44, and 45 and 59, with it trailing as an issue for people who are 60 and over. But for voters who are 60 and over, and obviously if you're in that age bracket watching my channel, you probably did vote conservative. But for those voters, they mainly cared about dealing with Donald Trump. That was an issue that 50% of people in that bracket cared about. When you go down to making housing more affordable, people in the age brackets of 18 and 29 and 30 and 44 marked that as one of their top issues around 28% of the time. Obviously, reducing your cost of living was their main issue. But when you go to voters 60 and over, making housing more affordable drops below 10% of things that they chose as a top issue. And then you go to things like improving Canada's healthcare system. That's where 16 over voters cared a little bit more. But on other things about the economy, that was just not a concern. And this is not to blame anyone for, oh my goodness, you voted wrong. People vote how they vote. And I think that is always the good way of actually viewing politics. People vote how they vote. And you just have to adapt to how they're voting in order to win next time. And that doesn't mean becoming Aaron O'Toole, where all you do is just tack yourself to the middle of the road and you become inoffensive to everybody. What you need to do is find the issues that you actually believe in, because never run on something you don't believe in. And you need to find a way of speaking on those issues to voters who maybe don't think that that's their key issue. That is what we need to do in the next election. But I also want to bring this up on screen as well. This is just the Globe and Mail results page, and it's just showing southwestern Ontario right now. Because I believe I was actually pretty straight on when it came to where the Conservatives were going to be making pickups. The main reason why the Liberals were still able to secure a minority, which is the bad in this video, that the Liberals are still going to hold on to their minority. The Conservatives picked up seats in places where I had heard people saying it's absurd for them to pick up seats, like Windsor West and Windsor Tecumseh Lakeshore. They ended up winning an actual London riding, London Fanshawe here, because of a vote split between the Liberals and the NDP, although they still won with 5,900 votes as their margin, which is not a super split vote. They ended up actually winning Kitchener Centre from the Greens. They ended up winning Kitchener South Hesper. All of these working class ridings went super hardcore conservative. And at a later date, I want to bring up the maps and start comparing them, because you'll see where a lot of the conservative strength now lies. And these are not ridings that they're winning by small rates. These are ridings being won with decisive amounts of people voting conservative. York Center, Roman Baber beat Yahara Sachs with 5,700 votes as the margin. You had Markham Unionville going conservative. You had Richmond Hill South. You had Aurora Ridges, Richmond Hill. All these ridings, especially with more heavy Chinese populations, are going conservative, because on the issues like crime and drugs, the Conservatives are doing really, really well on. But this election, I would almost say, is a short circuit election. It was fast. The Liberals were able to swap out a leader, and Donald Trump was definitely dominating many voters' minds when it came to how they were planning on voting, what were their main priorities when they were considering the candidates. But this is something that's actually been pretty much throughout the country a result trend. More working class areas went very conservative, even if the Liberals held them previously, whereas more what I would call metropolitan suburban areas ended up going liberal. So the riding of Confederation in Calgary actually ended up going liberal, even though it was conservative last time. But the liberal George Chahal up in the Northeast running in McKnight, who was previously in Skyview, ended up going blue. He ended up getting kicked out of office. That happened a lot of different places. It was the microcultures of the different ridings that made up a big difference. Where in previous elections, there was more of that idea that we're the East, we vote liberal out here, and that we're the West, we vote blue out here. And so that is actually something that's been completely shaken up in this election. Newfoundland became very close between the Liberals and Conservatives. Conservatives only having one seat in Newfoundland in the last election. They actually gained one, and one is on the absolute cusp of flipping, because working class fishermen ended up splitting very hard towards the Conservatives. Same thing on Vancouver Island. Used to just be red and orange, and now it actually has quite a bit of blue on it. Nanaimo Ladysmith went blue because it's a working class riding and those people wanted change. Whereas if you go to places where it's a higher percentage of government employees, higher percentage of retired voters, then they were voting for protecting basically government budgets as well as defending the country against Trump. And perfectly, I guess, legitimate reason to vote. I just don't think that I think those votes were kind of misplaced in terms of the result that you wanted. Now, let's go over what basically the bad is, and that is, of course, the Liberals having won the election. I just want to show you the overall seat and vote count at the moment. Currently, as things stand, although there is about 8 or 10 ridings super close that might end up flipping back and forth as votes are counted and as recounts are done, it's not going to change the macro result, but it might change how big the Liberal minority is. The Liberals, out of 343 seats, 169, Conservatives 144, which is actually substantial improvement for the Conservatives. They only won 119 last time. Bloc Québécois got 22, which is a fall of 11. New Democrats got 7. And the Green Party, which I'm not even going to scroll over to mention, they got their 1 with Elizabeth May and Saanich in the Gulf Islands. The big thing that happened here for the Conservatives is that they basically had the NDP and the Bloc collapse on them. So the Conservatives have a great result, but the Liberals also had a fantastic result because the New Democrats, under the leadership of Jagmeet Singh, who, by the way, great result in this election, is now out of office. But because he was weak, a lot of NDP voters concluded, rightfully so, what's the point of voting NDP if I'm going to get the Liberals anyways by electing NDP MPs, and it's more efficient just to throw your votes behind the Liberals? So whoever becomes the NDP leader in this next year is actually going to be very key. I'm not sure if they're going to go outside of their caucus because they only have 7 people now, or they're going to pick someone like Heather McPherson, since like if they pick the right person, it actually could hurt the Liberals. It could end up damaging them by having someone who's more willing to be oppositional. Because Jagmeet Singh, again, by being so complicit, I guess, by bear hugging the Trudeau Liberal government, ended up ticking off a lot of those working class voters that the NDP relied on. And that's why we had places like Vaughan Woodbridge go so blue. That's why the Conservatives, in fact, won a Hamilton riding that they hadn't won in quite a while, because all of those guys who work on construction sites or other communities that are heavily involved in construction and kind of hands-on work who you'd vote NDP ended up swinging over to the blue. But and then in other areas where it was more of a liberal NDP riding and it's a little bit more metropolitan suburban, the NDP ended up benefiting the Liberals and prevented Conservative victories. And then again, there was places like Peterborough and Carleton, who I think the micro riding culture tends to be that when NDP voters end up defecting to another party, those people started going towards the Liberals because the culture in those ridings is more, pro-government, I guess what you would say. It's more kind of anti-Trump. Not that there's like super pro-Trump ridings in Canada, but the idea was that was a motivating factor. It's more retired in the area. It's more patrician, I guess the culture is, that they didn't want the hard-nosed conservatives to come in and they're going to vote against Trump by voting liberal. And again, it can be frustrating, but there is no such thing as dooming. There is no such thing as being negative. There is only doing better next time, which the Conservatives can. They gained like 30 seats here, or about like 27 seats. It's not a bad result. The Liberals gained like 5 seats. They only netted an extra 5 seats here, so they still failed to win, and now they're going to have to rely on the NDP. And from what Don Davies is saying, who's an NDP MP in Vancouver, it looks like the NDP, because they actually lost party status from dropping below 10 seats, is going to try and negotiate with the Liberals to lower the threshold for what you need parties, how many seats you need party status. So with 7 seats, the NDP actually might get party status to keep their extra parliamentary budget safe, because you get a little bit extra money in your parliamentary caucus budget if you actually are an official party. So maybe the Liberals are going to drop down the official party line all the way down to 7. But that's all going to be stuff that's going to be shaken out as time goes on here. I do just want to tell you the exact vote count right here that you probably already saw earlier if you were eagle-eyed. So Liberals got 43.7% of the vote. Conservatives got 41.3%. Bloc got 6.3%. NDP embarrassingly actually got fewer votes than the Bloc with 63% of the votes, or they got a little bit more, but still. And then the Greens got 1.3. By the way, the PPC got 0.7% of the vote, which, in fact, in my mind, proves that Maxime Bernier going on a bunch of American podcasts proved that the American podcasts really don't work. Going onto American podcasts when you're running for election in Canada doesn't make people take another look at you. You, in fact, probably want to do more Canadian media. And if Polyev did one good thing in the election, it was not doing the American podcast circuit. That was a bad idea. But we can talk about more of in a post-mortem video in the future where the Conservatives maybe need to improve, where they went wrong, what's going to happen with Polyev and the Conservative leadership. But overall, it's just a weird election. We are basically where we were back in 2021, which is where we were back in 2019. Nothing ever changes in Canada, apparently. Very unfortunate, but whatever. I'm still here and I'm going to still be making videos. I might not be putting out as many in the future, but it's not like I'm going to start like skipping days and having nothing for weeks. What it's going to be is because obviously people are less jazzed up about election time. I can sit back and do 20-minute breakdowns on specific topics I find interesting in Canadian electoral politics, or even provincial issues that are going to now rise to the top as federal politics sort of fades into the background, because everything kind of feels a little bit more normal the year after a government settles in. Even if they start doing bad things, a lot of Canadians are not really going to notice one way or the other for about a good 9 months now. So yeah, that's it for me today, guys. Thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning into the stream yesterday. That was a good part of the election. You guys seem to have broken every record I could possibly ever set for myself for an election live stream. We had at one point 8,500 people watching me and Daniel Boardman live break down the election. I know people were like perturbed, like, who is Daniel? Why is he here? He filled a very specific role, making sure I wasn't going to go insane only talking to myself for 6.5 hours. But that was great. Had tons of people chatting, sending in super chats to support the channel. That was amazing, guys. Thank you. I'm definitely going to be using that to, what you guys sent in for money to invest in the channel, upgrade things, buy better cameras, buy better tripods. I really want a big whiteboard that I'm going to go get for the corner of the room so I can have a second camera setup. So on other days I can like whip out a marker and start drawing up little things I want to talk about. So with that being said, thanks for watching and I'll see you guys later.